My name is Knox, 32 years old, and living with the weight of words unsaid until that Thanksgiving dinner. I never thought a simple dessert course would become the battlefield where years of hurt would finally surface. When Aunt Deborah casually said she wished I'd never been born, everyone laughed it off as her usual acerbic humor. Everyone except me. Something inside finally snapped as I set my fork down, heart pounding against my ribs. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner table, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to that one toxic family member who always tries to bring you down. I've always been the family achiever, the one who checked all the boxes. Good grades through school computer science degree, from a respectable university steady, climb up the corporate ladder at a software development company in Boston. From the outside, I had it all together. My apartment downtown, my responsible financial habits, my carefully constructed professional image, all of it designed to prove something. To whom? That's the million-dollar question I avoided asking myself for years. The answer, though, I hated to admit, it was my family. Specifically, Aunt Deborah. My mother's older sister had been a looming presence throughout my childhood, always ready with a cutting remark or backhanded compliment. Nothing I achieved was ever quite enough. My straight-as should have been accompanied by more extracurriculars. My scholarship wasn't to an Ivy League school. My first job wasn't prestigious enough. My promotion came rather late compared to my peers. Our relationship had always been this way. My earliest memories include her scrutinizing gaze at family gatherings, the slight purse of her lips before she'd offer some observation about my appearance, my manners, my potential, always framed as helpful concern, but landing like precision strikes to my self-confidence. Just trying to make sure you reach your potential. Knox, she would say, patting my cheek with cold fingers, someone has to be honest with you. That Thanksgiving had particular significance. After 5 years at my company, I'd finally landed a major promotion to lead developer, overseeing a team of 12 and a project with potential industry-wide impact. This achievement felt different, substantial enough that maybe, just maybe, it would finally earn genuine approval instead of qualified praise from Aunt Deborah. The week before Thanksgiving, I'd spent hours rehearsing how I'd casually mention the promotion. Not too boastful, but confident. Matter of fact, but with enough detail to convey the significance. I'd imagined various scenarios prepared for different reactions. What I didn't prepare for was what actually happened. The drive to my parents' suburban home that Thursday morning was filled with unusual optimism. New England's fall colors had faded, leaving behind bare trees against a crisp blue sky. I'd brought an expensive bottle of wine and my mother's favorite chocolates. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood seemed more welcoming than oppressive for once. My parents greeted me with their usual enthusiasm. Mom with a tight hug that smelled of cinnamon and perfume, Dad with a firm handshake that transitioned into an awkward half-embrace. My younger sister Madison was already in the kitchen with her husband Thomas and their 4-year-old daughter Lily, who ran to me with sticky hands and unbridled affection. "Uncle Knox, I lost a tooth," she announced proudly, displaying the gap in her smile. "That's amazing, Lily." Did the tooth fairy come? I swung her up into my arms, grateful for the uncomplicated joy of a child's company. Aunt Deborah arrived precisely on time as always. She swept in wearing an obviously expensive cashmere sweater and carrying a homemade pie that would undoubtedly be perfect. My Uncle Roger followed behind, carrying the good wine they'd brought, his expression already apologetic, as it often was in family gatherings. "Knox," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "You look tired. Working too hard as usual. You know stress ages the skin prematurely." And so it began. But I was determined not to let her affect me this time. I had good news after all. Real, substantial good news. The early part of the gathering went as these things typically do. Kitchen chaos as final preparations came together, the football game providing background noise in the living room, scattered conversations, and catching up. I helped my father carve the turkey, arranged serving dishes, mixed drinks, played with Lily, and waited for the right moment to share my news. That moment came during the first course, as we passed mashed potatoes and gravy around the table. "So I actually have some news," I said during a natural lull in conversation. "I got promoted last week. I'm leading the development team on the Reynolds project now." The table erupted in congratulations. My mother beamed with genuine pride. Dad raised his glass in a toast. Madison gave me a thumbs up across the cranberry sauce. Even Uncle Roger offered sincere congratulations. And then there was Aunt Deborah, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. "Well," she said, buttering a roll with precise movements, "it's about time they recognized you. Though I suppose it's not surprising it took so long given how you've always struggled with assertiveness." Just like that, the shine dimmed on my moment. But I had anticipated something like this. I was ready this time. I wasn't going to let her take this from me. "Actually," I replied evenly, "the timeline is pretty standard for our industry. If anything, I'm ahead of the curve." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they told you to make you feel better about waiting so long? How thoughtful." And then she smoothly changed the subject, asking my mother about her garden club. The conversation moved on, but something had shifted inside me. A tiny crack in the dam of patience and politeness I'd built over decades. Dinner progressed with the usual rhythm of family gatherings. Plates being passed, glasses being refilled. Conversations overlapping and diverging. On the surface, it all appeared normal, but beneath ran currents of tension I couldn't ignore anymore. Aunt Deborah's comments continued throughout the meal, each one a small paper cut. When I mentioned a challenging project aspect I'd solved, she wondered aloud if someone more experienced wouldn't have encountered that problem at all. When I talked about potentially buying my apartment instead of renting, she questioned whether that's really the best financial decision at your age, especially in this economy. I noticed how my family responded to these moments. The quick glances exchanged between my parents, Madison's slight eye roll, Uncle Roger's sudden interest in his wine glass. They all recognized what was happening, but years of conditioning had taught us all to let it slide. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. That's just how Deborah is. As I pushed turkey and stuffing around my plate, memories from childhood flooded back. Deborah critiquing my science fair project in 4th grade until I cried in the school bathroom. Deborah commenting that my 16th birthday suit looked a bit snug around the middle, leading to my first crash diet. Deborah suggesting my college choice was settling during what should have been a celebration dinner. These memories had sharp edges cutting through the careful compartmentalization I'd constructed. I found myself watching how Deborah interacted with everyone else at the table. She had praise for Madison's parenting skills, but followed it with concerns about Lily's vocabulary development compared to other children her age. She complimented my mother's turkey, but wondered if it was perhaps a touch overdone this year. She asked Thomas about his law practice with thinly veiled suggestions that he wasn't at a prestigious enough firm. It was a masterclass in subtle undermining, death by 1,000 cuts, and we all just took it. My father changed subjects. My mother refilled water glasses. Madison distracted Lily. Thomas talked sports with Uncle Roger. The well-rehearsed dance of avoidance. Between the main course and dessert, I escaped to the bathroom, leaning against the sink and studying my reflection. I hardly recognized the man staring back, successful by most measures, yet still seeking approval from someone determined never to give it. I splashed cold water on my face and made a decision I wouldn't react with anger, but I also wouldn't silently accept another holiday of Deborah's subtle cruelty. "You okay in there, bro?" Madison's voice came through the door, followed by her concerned face when I opened it. "She's on a roll today, isn't she?" "How do you stand it?" I asked quietly, making sure we wouldn't be overheard. Madison shrugged, her expression resigned. "I guess I just accepted that's who she is. Nothing's going to change her." "Maybe," I said, "but something could change how we respond to her." My sister gave me a wary look. "Knox, please don't make a scene. It's not worth it." "I'm not planning to," I assured her. "But I'm also done pretending everything's fine." When we returned to the dining room, Mom was serving her famous apple pie with vanilla ice cream. The atmosphere had lightened somewhat with Lily's antics, drawing genuine laughter. I took my seat, trying to recapture some of the determination I'd felt in the bathroom mirror. As dessert progressed, I shared a story about mentoring a new junior developer at work, a young woman named Sophia, who reminded me of myself when I was starting out. I described how rewarding it felt to help someone navigate the challenges I'd once faced. "That's wonderful, Knox," my mother said warmly. "You've always been good at explaining things to others." "Yes," Aunt Deborah interjected, setting down her fork with precision. "Though mentoring can sometimes be a distraction from your own work, I hope it doesn't affect your performance now that you have actual responsibilities." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice even. "Actually, being a good leader means developing your team. It's part of the job description." "Well," she replied with a dismissive wave, "I suppose someone has to take these young people under their wing. Though in my experience, too much hand-holding creates dependency rather than competence." The table fell uncomfortably silent for a moment. I could feel everyone bracing for what might come next. The familiar pattern of provocation, response escalation, and eventual awkward change of subject. But this time something different happened. As I opened my mouth to respond with another reasonable defense, Aunt Deborah shook her head and said the words that would change everything but, "Knox always so sensitive about criticism. Sometimes I wish you were never born into this family. You'd have been spared the burden of such a thin skin." The dessert plates gleamed under the dining room chandelier. Mom had brought out the good china, the set with delicate blue flowers around the edges that only appeared for holidays and special occasions. The apple pie released cinnamon-scented steam, as it cooled whipped cream melting over the warm filling, creating rivers of white against golden-brown crust. The scene could have been from a Norman Rockwell painting, the perfect American Thanksgiving tableau. Then those words landed like a grenade at the center of the table. "Sometimes I wish you were never born into this family." Everyone laughed. Not full-throated, genuine laughter, but the uncomfortable chuckle people produce when something inappropriate happens in public. The kind of laugh that says, "This is awkward, but we're going to pretend it's humor." Dad coughed into his napkin. Mom busied herself with serving more pie. Madison shot me a sympathetic glance while Thomas suddenly became fascinated with his dessert fork. Everyone laughed except me. I put my fork down slowly, deliberately, the sterling silver making the softest clink against fine china. The apple pie before me, which had smelled so enticing moments before, might as well have been cardboard. My mouth went dry. My palms grew damp. Inside my chest, my heart hammered so hard I was certain everyone could hear it, could see my shirt moving with each beat. 28 years of comments just like this one flashed through my mind like a grotesque slideshow. The subtle digs, the backhanded compliments, the constant moving of goalposts so that no achievement was ever quite enough. The way she could find the soft underbelly of any joy and slip her knife in so smoothly, you almost didn't feel the cut until later. I became intensely aware of every sensation in my body. The scratch of my collar against my neck, the pressure of the chair against my back, the way my shoes suddenly felt too tight. My face felt hot, then cold. Time seemed to slow down as I considered my options. I could do what I always did, force a smile, deflect, change the subject, retreat to lick my wounds in private, the path of least resistance, the expected response. Or I could do something else entirely. "Knox, she's just joking," my mother said nervously, her eyes pleading. "You know how Deborah's sense of humor can be." Aunt Deborah herself was already moving on, asking Lily if she wanted more ice cream, acting as if she hadn't just said she wished I didn't exist. The ultimate dismissal, saying something devastating and then treating it as so insignificant it didn't even warrant acknowledgement. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I don't think that was a joke." Conversation halted. Forks paused midway to mouths. Eyes widened and darted between Aunt Deborah and me. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Deborah said with an exaggerated eye roll. "This is exactly what I mean about your sensitivity. It was obviously a figure of speech." I looked at her directly, maintaining eye contact in a way I never had before. "Was it because it sounded like something you actually meant?" Uncle Roger cleared his throat. Now, let's not turn this into something it's not. We're all family here." "Yes," I agreed, still looking at Aunt Deborah. "We are family. Which makes me wonder why you've spent my entire life finding new ways to tear me down." The table went completely silent. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how these interactions were supposed to go. I had deviated from the decades-old pattern, and no one knew quite how to respond. "I have done no such thing," Aunt Deborah said, her voice rising slightly. "I've only ever wanted the best for you. If honest feedback feels like criticism, perhaps, that says more about you than it does about me." I felt a strange calm spreading through me. Years of suppressed responses, carefully swallowed retorts, and ignored pain had created a pressure that was finally finding release, but not as anger, as clarity. I smiled. Not the fake, placating smile I usually wore during these encounters, but a genuine smile born of sudden understanding. I was done performing for her approval, done accepting the unacceptable, done pretending that cruelty was just Deborah being Deborah. "You just said you wished I was never born," I said quietly. "And everyone at this table laughed because we've all normalized your behavior for so long that even saying something that horrible seems within bounds." Aunt Deborah's face flushed. "I was making a point about your hypersensitivity, which you are demonstrating perfectly right now." I shook my head. "No, what I'm demonstrating is having boundaries. There's a difference." And then I said it. The one line that would change everything. "Did you ever think that your constant criticism of everyone around you might be why Uncle Roger has been having an affair with his assistant for the past 3 years? The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the distant tick of my mother's antique wall clock and the soft hiss of the radiator. Aunt Deborah's face went from flushed to ashen in seconds. Her perfectly manicured hand froze midway to her water glass. Uncle Roger looked as though he might slide under the table, his expression a mixture of mortification and relief, as if some terrible pressure had been suddenly catastrophically released. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Knox," she gasped. I hadn't planned to say it. I'd known about the affair for months. I'd seen Uncle Roger and his assistant having dinner together in a restaurant near my office, their body language unmistakable. When confronted privately, he'd broken down and confessed everything, begging me not to tell Aunt Deborah, claiming he was working up the courage to either end the affair or his marriage. I'd reluctantly agreed to his request for time. But in that moment, with Deborah's words still echoing in my ears, the secret had emerged as the perfect weapon, and I'd used it. "That's not true," Aunt Deborah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes darted to Uncle Roger, whose silence was confirmation enough. "Roger," she asked, her voice suddenly small. Uncle Roger couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at his half-eaten pie, shoulders slumped in defeat. "Deborah, we should discuss this at home." "My God," she whispered. "It is true." The power in the room had shifted seismically. For the first time in my life, Aunt Deborah appeared vulnerable, stripped of her armor of superiority. I expected to feel triumph, or at least vindication. Instead, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness, not for her, but for all of us, and the years we'd wasted in this unhealthy dynamic. "Knox, that was completely inappropriate," my father said, though there was a lack of conviction in his tone. I caught a flicker of something else in his eyes. Was it respect? "I know," I acknowledged. "And I'm sorry it came out this way." I turned to Uncle Roger. "I promised you time, and I broke that promise. That was wrong of me." Madison was staring at me with wide eyes, her fork suspended in midair. "Wait, you knew about this?" "That's hardly the point right now," my mother interjected, ever the peacekeeper. "Deborah, Roger, perhaps you two should—" "No," Aunt Deborah interrupted, suddenly regaining some of her composure. "This is a pathetic attempt by Knox to deflect from his own issues by creating drama. Always the problem child, always seeking attention." It was such a stunning reversal of reality that I actually laughed, not mockingly but in genuine disbelief. Incredible. Even now you can't stop. "Stop," what she demanded. The gaslighting, the cruelty disguised as concern, the need to make everyone around you feel small so you can feel big. Thomas, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, cleared his throat. "Knox has a point, Deborah. You do have a habit of saying pretty harsh things and then acting like others are overreacting when they get hurt." "Exactly when have I done this?" Deborah challenged, her voice sharp. "Last Christmas," Madison said quietly. "You told me I'd let myself go after having Lily. I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. "I was concerned about your health," Deborah protested. At my law school graduation, Thomas added, "You said, it was impressive I'd made it through considering my background, as if growing up middle class in Milwaukee made me some kind of charity case. That was a compliment on your determination." One by one, family members began recounting incidents, small and large, where Deborah's words had cut deep. It was as if a dam had broken. Years of silently endured comments came pouring out. Aunt Deborah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked in my own family. Roger, we're leaving." Uncle Roger hesitated, looking torn. "Roger," she repeated, her voice dangerous. He stood slowly, avoiding everyone's eyes. "I'm sorry about all this," he muttered. "Don't apologize to them," she snapped. "Knox deliberately humiliated us." "No," I said calmly. "I just stopped pretending that your behavior is acceptable. There's a difference." Aunt Deborah gathered her purse and coat with rigid movements. "Margaret," she said to my mother, "call me when your son remembers his manners." As she stalked toward the door, Uncle Roger following like a shadow, she turned back for one parting shot. "I meant what I said, Knox. This family would have been better off without your drama and sensitivity." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Regret at how things had exploded, relief that it was finally out in the open, worry about the fallout, but most surprisingly, a profound sense of peace. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood my ground with the person who had made me feel inadequate since childhood. Well, my father finally said that was certainly a Thanksgiving to remember. "Knox," my mother began, her voice wavering between concern and reproach. "Was that really necessary?" "Honestly, yes," I replied. "I think it was long overdue. But exposing Roger's affair like that—" "I know. That part I regret. He deserved better." I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. "I should probably go too." "No," Madison said firmly. "You don't need to leave. What you said needed to be said, even if the timing was dramatic." "She's right," Thomas agreed. "Deborah's been bullying this family for years, and we've all just taken it. Maybe this needed to happen." My mother sighed deeply, looking suddenly older. "I should have stood up to my sister long ago. This isn't just on you, Knox." I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them perhaps for the first time. My father's face showed a mixture of concern and what might have been pride. Madison was nodding subtly, as if confirming something to herself. Thomas appeared relieved, and little Lily was blissfully unaware, happily smashing ice cream into pie crust. "I still think I should go," I said gently. "Give everyone some space to process. But I'm not sorry I finally said something. I'm just sorry about how it all came out." As I stood to leave, Madison reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really." The drive back to my apartment felt surreal. The same roads I'd traveled that morning now seemed to belong to a different world entirely. The radio played Christmas music already, Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases, creating a bizarre soundtrack to my racing thoughts. My hands shook slightly on the steering wheel, adrenaline still coursing through my system. Had I really done that? Had I actually stood up to Aunt Deborah after all these years, and in such a spectacular, bridge-burning fashion? The weight of what had transpired settled on me gradually as I navigated the nearly empty streets. I had exposed Uncle Roger's affair in the worst possible way. I had potentially fractured family relationships beyond repair. I had deviated so completely from the carefully constructed image I'd maintained for years. The peacekeeper, the achiever, the one who never rocked the boat. Yet beneath the guilt and uncertainty, something else was emerging: relief. A profound, bone-deep relief that felt like putting down a heavy burden I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar silence. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since I'd left, but I couldn't bring myself to check it yet. Whatever was waiting, recriminations, support, damage control, could wait until morning. Sleep eluded me that night. I replayed the scene at the dinner table countless times, sometimes wincing at my own words, other times feeling a surge of vindication. By morning, exhaustion had settled in, along with a strange sense of emptiness, as if I'd been hollowed out and was waiting to see what would fill the void. The first call came from Madison, around 9 in the morning. "How are you holding up?" she asked without preamble. "Honestly, I'm not sure." "How bad is it?" She let out a short laugh. "Well, Mom's been on the phone with various relatives since 6 this morning doing damage control. Dad's surprisingly chill about the whole thing. I think he might have secretly enjoyed seeing Deborah finally get called out. And I just got a text from cousin Jessica saying, Uncle Roger moved into a hotel last night." I groaned. "God, I feel terrible about that part. I never meant to blow up his marriage." "Knox, listen to me," Madison said firmly. "Their marriage problems aren't on you. This was going to come out eventually. And for what it's worth, I think you showed incredible restraint considering all the crap Deborah's put you through over the years." "Does everyone hate me now?" I asked, feeling absurdly like a child again. "Quite the opposite, actually. I've gotten 3 separate texts from family members essentially saying, 'About time someone stood up to her.' You might be surprised how many people are on your side." The next call was from Uncle Roger himself. His voice sounded rough-tired. "Knox, I need to clear the air," he began. "I'm not angry with you." "You should be," I replied. "What I did was unforgivable." Maybe he conceded, but it was also inevitable. My affair was wrong and I've been a coward about ending it or coming clean. That's on me, not you. "How are things with Aunt Deborah?" I ventured. He sighed heavily. "As you can imagine, not good. But truthfully, they haven't been good for years. Your aunt is not an easy person to live with. I'm not excusing my behavior, but there's a reason I looked elsewhere for connection." After we hung up, I sat with that revelation. I'd always seen Uncle Roger as Aunt Deborah's sidekick, her silent supporter. It had never occurred to me that he might be another of her victims in his own way. The days after Thanksgiving unfolded in unexpected patterns. I returned to work, throwing myself into the new responsibilities of my promotion, finding comfort in the structure and logic of coding. My team noticed something different about me. A new directness, perhaps, or a confidence that hadn't been there before. "You seem more present," Sophia, the junior developer I'd been mentoring, observed during our weekly check-in. "Like you're fully here now." I considered her words. "I think maybe I am." A week after the incident, I received a text from my youngest cousin, Zach Deborah, and Roger's son. We'd never been particularly close. He was 10 years younger than me and had always been shielded by Aunt Deborah's influence. "Can we meet for coffee sometime?" his message read. "There's a lot I want to talk about." We met at a cafe near my office the following Saturday. Zach looked like a younger version of Uncle Roger, with the same gentle eyes and uncertain smile. But there was something new in his demeanor, a straightness to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you," he said after we'd exchanged awkward greetings, "for what you did at Thanksgiving." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're thanking me for publicly humiliating your parents." He shook his head. "For finally saying what nobody else would. Mom's difficult. Growing up with her was like walking through a minefield. I never knew what would set her off, what arbitrary standard I'd fail to meet next." The realization hit me with stunning clarity. Of course, if Aunt Deborah had been this way with extended family, how much worse must it have been for her own son? "I'm sorry," I said. "I never really considered how it was for you." "Nobody did," he replied without bitterness. "Everyone was too busy navigating their own relationship with her. But watching you stand up to her, it changed something for me. I've started therapy, actually, trying to unpack some of this stuff." "That's great, Zach. Really? Dad's doing better too, believe it or not. Says he feels like he can breathe for the first time in decades." As we talked, I began to see the wider ripples of what had happened at Thanksgiving. My moment of rebellion hadn't just been about me. It had created space for others to examine their own relationships with Aunt Deborah. Some, like Zach, were finding liberation. Others, like my mother, were wrestling with complicated feelings of loyalty and guilt. Over the next few weeks, family alliances shifted and reformed. Some relatives sided firmly with Deborah, seeing me as the villain who had disrupted family harmony. Others reached out privately to express support or share their own stories of Deborah's behavior. My mother found herself caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to her sister and the dawning recognition of how toxic that relationship had been. I always told myself I was keeping the peace, she admitted during a quiet dinner at my apartment 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, but maybe I was just enabling her behavior. We all were, Mom, I reassured her. It's what families do sometimes. Normalize the abnormal because it's easier than confronting it. December arrived with snow and holiday preparations. The question looming over everyone's minds was obvious: what would happen at Christmas? The traditional family gathering at my parents' house suddenly seemed impossible given the current fractures. The answer came from an unexpected quarter. My mother called one evening, her voice tentative. "Deborah's hosting Christmas this year," she announced. "She's invited everyone, except you." I felt a pang despite myself. "I see. Your father and I told her we wouldn't attend if you weren't welcome." She continued, her voice stronger now. "So did Madison and Thomas and Zach and cousin Jessica's family. Mom, I don't want to be the reason everyone's Christmas is ruined." "You're not," she said firmly. "Deborah is, and it's time she understood that her behavior has consequences." In the end, 2 separate gatherings formed. A small one, at Aunt Deborah's, attended by the relatives who either sided with her or couldn't bear to break tradition, and a larger one at my parents' house, which felt more relaxed and genuine than any holiday gathering I could remember. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed from one holiday to the next. I'd started therapy myself, working through the accumulated weight of years spent seeking Deborah's approval and coming to terms with the fact that I would never receive it, and more importantly, that I no longer needed it. One snowy afternoon in January, the universe decided to test my progress. While shopping for groceries, I rounded a corner and came face to face with Aunt Deborah. She was studying a display of oranges, her expression as critical and evaluating as ever. Our eyes met. Time seemed to slow. I felt my heart rate increase, old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The automatic deference, the anticipatory anxiety. But something was different now. I could see Deborah clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the all-powerful arbiter of worth I'd built her up to be in my mind, but as a deeply unhappy woman whose critical nature had cost her the connection she secretly craved. "Hello, Deborah," said calmly. She stiffened, looked right through me as if I were a stranger, and walked away without a word. As I watched her retreat down the aisle, I realized I felt no anger, no resentment, only a profound sadness for all the years and relationships wasted, and a quiet determination that I would not carry that pattern forward in my own life. The first major holiday after the Thanksgiving confrontation was Easter. Traditionally, the family would gather at my parents' house for an elaborate lunch and an egg hunt for the children. This year, the invitation came with an unspoken question. What would the dynamic be like without Aunt Deborah present? She had maintained radio silence with most of the family since Christmas. Uncle Roger had filed for divorce in February, a development that sent shockwaves through the extended family despite its inevitability. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown, and according to those still in contact with him, seemed to be slowly rediscovering himself after decades in Deborah's shadow. He joined a bowling league, my mother reported with something like wonder during one of our weekly phone calls. Roger. Bowling. Can you imagine? I couldn't truthfully. In all the years I'd known my uncle, he'd never expressed interest in anything Aunt Deborah didn't approve of. It was like watching someone emerge from a long hibernation, blinking in the sudden light. The Easter gathering itself was notably different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy cloud had dissipated. Conversations flowed more naturally. People laughed more readily. Even my father, typically reserved at family functions, told stories and jokes with unexpected animation. Madison pulled me aside as we watched Lily hunting for eggs in the backyard. "It's weird, right? How different everything feels." The answer, though I hated to admit it, was my family, specifically Aunt Deborah. My mother's older sister had been a looming presence throughout my childhood, always ready with a cutting remark or backhanded compliment. Nothing I achieved was ever quite enough. My straight A's should have been accompanied by more extracurriculars. My scholarship wasn't to an Ivy League school. My first job wasn't prestigious enough. My promotion came rather late compared to my peers. She considered for a moment. Good, weird, like we can all breathe now. She bumped my shoulder with hers. Thanks to you, brave confronter of toxic ants. Good weird or bad weird, I asked. Maybe she conceded. But sometimes a clean break is what's needed, like pulling off a bandage. As spring turned to summer, I found myself flourishing in unexpected ways. The energy I'd previously devoted to seeking approval and managing my reactions to criticism was now channeled into my work, my friendships, and new interests. I took up rock climbing. I joined a book club. I started dating again after a 2-year hiatus. You seem different, remarked Grace, a woman I'd been seeing for several weeks as we shared dessert at a restaurant near the harbor. More present, more yourself. I smiled, recognizing the observation as similar to what Sophia had noticed months earlier. I am different. I finally stopped trying to earn the approval of someone determined not to give it. My therapist, Dr. Lillian Chen, helped me understand the deeper patterns at work. What's interesting, she observed during one session, is how your relationship with your aunt shaped so many aspects of your life without you realizing it. Your perfectionism at work, your hesitation in romantic relationships, even your conflict avoidance, all connected to that core dynamic. She was right. I'd built my entire personality around proving my worth to someone who would never acknowledge it. The liberation from that pattern was still unfolding, revealing aspects of myself I'd never had the freedom to explore. In July, my parents celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a backyard party. It was smaller than originally planned. The family rift meant some relatives declined to attend, but somehow more meaningful for its intimacy. My mother found me alone by the makeshift bar mixing another batch of sangria. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly. For what? For saying what I should have said years ago. She twisted her wedding ring absently. I let my sister treat all of us, terribly because it was easier than confronting her. I'm sorry for that. I hugged her tightly. You don't need to apologize, Mom. I do, actually. She pulled back to look at me directly. Parents are supposed to protect their children, and I failed at that. But I'm learning. Better late than never, right? Uncle Roger attended the anniversary party, arriving with a cheerfulness that seemed foreign on him. He'd lost weight, gotten a new haircut, and wore clothes that actually fit properly, rather than the ill-fitting suits Aunt Deborah had always selected. He made a heartfelt toast to my parents that brought tears to several eyes. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, he caught me helping clean up. The divorce will be final next month, he said, without preamble. How do you feel about that? I asked. He considered the question seriously. Sad for the wasted years, relieved its ending, guilty about my part in the mess, hopeful about whatever comes next. He shrugged. All of it at once, I guess. And the situation with your assistant, I ventured cautiously. Ended, he said firmly. That was never going to work long term. It was an escape, not a relationship. He paused, then added, I owe you an apology, Knox. I put you in an impossible position by asking you to keep my secret. Water under the bridge, I assured him. Still, he insisted, I want you to know something. What you did at Thanksgiving, as uncomfortable as it was, ultimately gave me the push I needed to make changes I should have made years ago. So thank you, in a strange way. As summer faded into fall, I realized the 1-year anniversary of the confrontation was approaching. The traditional Thanksgiving gathering loomed with all its complicated history. Would Aunt Deborah be there? Would I? Could the family ever return to some version of normal holiday celebrations? The decision came unexpectedly. During a Sunday phone call with my parents, my mother broached the subject carefully. About Thanksgiving this year, she began. Your father and I were thinking of doing something different. Different how, I asked. We thought maybe we'd go to that resort in Vermont we've talked about for years. Just the two of us. A little getaway. I understood immediately what she was doing. Creating space for new traditions to form without the pressure of recreating the old ones. That sounds perfect, Mom. You two deserve it. But that leaves you and Madison and the others without the usual gathering, she pointed out. Actually, I said, the idea forming as I spoke I could host this year. At my place. Nothing fancy, just whoever wants to come. She paused, then said warmly, I think that would be wonderful, Knox. And so it was decided. I would host Thanksgiving at my apartment, the first major holiday gathering I'd ever organized. Madison and Thomas immediately agreed to come with Lily. Zach said he'd be there. Cousins Jessica and Michael confirmed. Uncle Roger accepted with enthusiasm. Other relatives responded with varying degrees of interest. Notably absent from any discussion was Aunt Deborah. No one mentioned inviting her. No one asked if she had other plans. It was as if by unspoken agreement we had all decided to move forward without her toxic presence. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I had my last run-in with Aunt Deborah. I was leaving a coffee shop when I spotted her across the street getting out of her car. Our eyes met briefly. For a moment I thought she might acknowledge me. There was something in her expression, a flicker of something almost like regret. But then, her face hardened into the familiar mask of disapproval, and she turned away, deliberately walking in the opposite direction. I stood watching her go, feeling an unexpected surge of compassion. Deborah had created a world where her worth depended on finding fault in others, and now she was alone in that critical, joyless world. The price of her superiority was connection, and it seemed a terribly high price to pay. As I prepared my apartment for Thanksgiving, buying extra chairs, borrowing serving dishes, planning the menu with Madison's help, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The pain and confrontation had given way to healing I couldn't have imagined that day at the dessert table. I was still the same Knox in many ways, still detail-oriented, still driven to succeed, still working on my perfectionist tendencies, but I was also fundamentally changed. I had learned to set boundaries. I had discovered what real family support felt like. Most importantly, I had stopped measuring my worth through Deborah's impossible standards. The day before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected text message from Uncle Roger. Deborah asked about your gathering tomorrow. I think she regrets how things played out. I stared at the message for a long time, uncertain how to respond. Part of me, the peacekeeper, the people-pleaser, wanted to extend an olive branch to invite her to try to mend the broken family circle. But the healthier part of me recognized that without real change on her part, bringing Deborah back into the fold would only restart the toxic patterns we'd all worked so hard to escape. I hope she finds peace, I finally replied. But I think separate celebrations are best for everyone right now. His response came quickly. I agree. Just thought you should know. That night, as I prepared the turkey for the next day, I found myself humming contentedly. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely looking forward to a holiday gathering, not with anxiety or dread, but with simple joy at the prospect of sharing a meal with people I loved in a space free from criticism and judgment. Whatever happened next with Aunt Deborah, reconciliation, continued estrangement, or something in between, would unfold in its own time, but it would happen on different terms. Never again would I sacrifice my well-being for the illusion of family harmony. Never again would I accept cruelty as the price of belonging. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving dessert, I stood in my apartment kitchen carving a golden brown turkey as laughter drifted in from the living room. Through the doorway, I could see Madison showing Lily how to fold napkins into swans. Thomas and Uncle Roger were deep in conversation about a football game. Cousins Jessica and Michael were arranging appetizers, while Zach mixed drinks with flourish. My apartment, usually so orderly and quiet, hummed with the beautiful chaos of family. My parents had called that morning from their Vermont getaway, sounding relaxed and happy. Everything ready for your big hosting debut, my father had asked. As ready as I'll ever be, I'd replied. Though I think I bought enough food for twice as many people. That's the sign of a true holiday host, my mother had laughed. Better too much than too little. Now, as I arranged turkey slices on a serving platter, I marveled at how much had changed in a single year. The person I'd been at last Thanksgiving, anxious approval, seeking walking on eggshells, seemed like a distant acquaintance rather than my former self. Therapy had helped enormously. Dr. Chen had guided me through understanding the roots of my people-pleasing tendencies and the complex family dynamics that had shaped them. Family systems often resist change, she'd explained. When you altered your role by standing up to your aunt, you forced the entire system to reorganize itself. That reorganization had been painful at times, illuminating at others. Some relationships had deepened significantly. My bond with Madison was stronger than ever, and I developed a genuine friendship with Uncle Roger and Zach that had never been possible under Aunt Deborah's influence. Other connections had faded or transformed. Certain relatives who sided firmly with Deborah now maintained only formal contact. And then there was Aunt Deborah herself. She remained on the periphery of family life, maintaining relationships with those who still accepted her critical nature and losing touch with those who now recognized it as harmful. According to those still in contact with her, she had rewritten the narrative of our confrontation completely, casting herself as the victim of my unprovoked attack, conveniently omitting her "I wish you were never born" comment. "Ready for the grand feast?" Madison asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "The natives are getting restless." "Just finishing up," I replied, adding a sprig of rosemary to the platter. "Hey, can I ask you something? Do you ever miss the way things were before the whole family together, even with all the tension?" She leaned against the counter, considering. "Sometimes I miss the idea of it. The perfect family holiday you see in commercials, but not the reality." She squeezed my arm. "What you did gave us something better. Authenticity, even if it's smaller and a little messier." When everyone had gathered around my dining table, extended with borrowed leaves and covered with a new tablecloth bought for the occasion, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed. Here was my family, not perfect but real, choosing to be together in a new way that allowed everyone to breathe freely. "Should we say grace?" Thomas asked. "Actually," I said, raising my glass, "I'd like to propose a toast first, to new beginnings and hard-earned wisdom. To learning that family isn't just about blood or obligation, but about creating spaces where everyone feels valued. And to all of you for taking this journey with me this past year." "Here's to boundaries and backbone," Madison added with a grin, raising her glass. "And to Knox," Uncle Roger said, "for having the courage to break the cycle." As we ate and talked and laughed, I reflected on what I'd learned through this painful but necessary transformation. The lesson wasn't simply about standing up to a bully, though that had been the catalyst. It was deeper than that. About recognizing when long-established patterns are harmful, about having the courage to disrupt those patterns despite the discomfort, and about creating space for healthier relationships to emerge from the wafen, disruption. I had learned that true family connection isn't maintained by walking on eggshells around toxic behavior. It's built on mutual respect, on celebrating each other's successes without qualification, on offering criticism with kindness when necessary, and on creating safe spaces where everyone can be authentically themselves. Most importantly, I'd learned that standing in your truth, even when it feels terrifying, even when it disrupts the status quo, is ultimately the path to freedom. The momentary discomfort of confrontation pales in comparison to the slow soul death of constant acquiescence. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, apple pie, of course, though the associations were forever changed, Lily climbed into my lap with a storybook. "Uncle Knox," she asked innocently, "why doesn't Great Aunt Deborah come to dinner anymore?" The room quieted, everyone suddenly interested in my response. I thought carefully about how to answer truthfully while remaining appropriate for a 5-year-old. "Sometimes, Lily," I said gently, "people in families have different ideas about how to treat each other. Great Aunt Deborah and I disagreed about that, and we decided it was better to celebrate holidays separately." She considered this seriously. "Was she mean?" Madison started to intervene, but I shook my head slightly. "Yes, sometimes she was, and it's okay to choose not to be around people who are mean to you, even if they're family." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "I like our Thanksgiving better this way," she declared before opening her book. "Everyone's happy. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say." Later that evening, as guests began to depart with containers of leftovers and warm hugs, Uncle Roger lingered behind. "I wanted you to know," he said quietly. "Deborah started therapy. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Really? That doesn't seem like something she would do. Losing most of her family connections has been harder on her than she expected, he explained. I don't know if it will lead to real change, but it's something. I hope it helps her, I said sincerely. Everyone deserves peace. He nodded. Don't expect miracles or apologies anytime soon. But I thought you should know your stand had far-reaching effects more than you might realize. After everyone had gone and I was alone in my apartment, now bearing the pleasant disarray of a successful gathering, I sat with a final glass of wine contemplating the journey of the past year. The confrontation at last Thanksgiving had been a defining moment, but it was the choices made every day since then that had truly transformed my life. I had chosen self-respect over approval-seeking. I had chosen authentic connection over superficial harmony. I had chosen truth, however uncomfortable, over comforting lies. And in doing so, I had found a freedom and peace I hadn't known was possible. As I looked toward the future, I felt none of the anxiety that had previously accompanied thoughts of family gatherings. Whatever came next, whether eventual reconciliation with Aunt Deborah or continued separate paths, I knew I could face it with integrity and strength. The simple truth I'd discovered was that standing up for yourself doesn't mean losing family. It means creating space for real family connections to flourish. Sometimes the family you preserve by speaking your truth is more valuable than the family you lose by doing so. So if you're watching this and recognizing your own Aunt Deborah in your life, remember that you deserve respect. You deserve to be celebrated rather than diminished. And sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for everyone else, is to put your fork down slowly, look toxic behavior in the eye, and calmly say, no more. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of personal growth and family transformation. And remember, creating healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-love that ultimately benefits everyone brave enough to respect them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey to authentic living.